But I came this morning to find some real worshipers who can understand that ain't nobody gonna rob you of worshiping God. It was Manly Beasley who said that a glimpse of God will save you, but to gaze at him will sanctify you. See, the reason I have to connect my knowledge of God and my worship to God together is because the more I get closer to him and the more I know about God in my worship, it allows me to live better. The more I get to know about God, it allows my nasty attitude to get better. The more I know about God, it allows my ugly disposition to get together. The more I know about God, it lets me see better. It lets my legs stay together. It allows my zipper to stay up. Because when I stay in the presence of God, my life enters into a spiritual realm that charges my spirit, but it kills my flesh. I hear some young person saying, I no longer want to be on the circumference of the sanctuary. I no longer want to be an innocent bystander of worship. I no longer desire a second-hand religion, but I want to be convicted. So it is, dear diary, the diary of a worshiping teenager. Number one, journal entry number one, if you're going to be a worshiping teenager, you got to take this thing personal. The text says that I may. See, that's personal expectation. See, we must have an individual inclination that ignites us to induce our personal inspiration of hope. In other words, we will never be true worshipers until we decide to be. See, I've discovered that God is a gentleman. He never rapes anybody to righteousness. Which means if you want God, you can have him. But if you don't want him, he don't want you either. God yields the floor and he gives all of us open access to him and says, if you want it, you can have it. But ultimately, whether we have it or not has nothing to do with God's accessibility, but it has to do with man's accountability. Apostle Paul says that I may. He suggests to us that worship is a personal choice to enter into the presence of God and make a decision to worship God. Not only do you got to make it personal, but journal entry number two, dear diary, you got to have some passion. The text says that I may know him. I want to know him. In the life of the believer, there has to come a point where you become passionate about forming true relationship with God. See, most people are content with just coming to church and clapping and congregating with no change in their character nor their conduct. For to be passionate about God means that you're serious about developing and growing into what God would have for you to be. How many of you know that you can't have a healthy relationship and you never talk to the one you say you're with? I hear many believers, many young persons say, I want more God and I want God to have more of me, but God can't have more of you if you don't open up your heart and let him in. Saints of old said, let him in today. Let him in to stay. Open up your heart and let the Lord come in. I take this thing passionately because we have to know something about God. The text says that I may know him in the power of his resurrection. You got to take it personal. You got to have some passion. But then you're going to need some power. That word power means force or miraculous might. See, it is my worship that I receive. It is in my worship weather that I receive the instant strength to bounce back. You wondering why your life is falling apart? It's because every time you get in trouble and every time trouble comes your way, you stop coming to church. Your boyfriend and got on your nerves, your mom and your daddy then got on your nerves and you stop, I ain't going to Sunday school today. Well, actually, I didn't come up in a household where I told my parents what to do. Little Johnny talking about, I was at the club all night last night. I was hanging with the boys, and then we went to go play some basketball. So, I don't feel like going to church. I don't know nothing about all of that. All I know is that you have to get to a place where you are really serious about worshiping God. And I've discovered that many of us don't want to worship God until we get in trouble. If my daddy was here, he would say that many a believer use God like AAA. We only call him when we get in the ditch. But I want to tell and encourage and admonish every believer under the sound of my voice and let you know that if you really want to have a good relationship with God, you're going to need some power. Anybody ever been sick? Feeling bad, jacked up attitude, didn't want to talk to nobody? You was pissed off, you was upset, messed up, jacked up, and tore up from the floor up? You was irritated, agitated, aggravated, oppressed, depressed, suppressed, crying, hurt. But as soon as you made it into the presence of God, you felt better. You felt something lifted on it. That's the power of the Holy Ghost. Anybody ever been struggling at home, but when you came through those doors, God lifted up that burden? It's because if you're going to be a real worshiper, you need some power. And God has given all of us some bounce back power. That's the glory of the Lord rising up in you, because whenever you worship God, you give God entrance into the secret places of your life. And he begins to invade every dying place and every crucifixion and every Friday evening in your life. And then he resurrects those places through your worship. If you're going to be a worshiping teenager, you got to take it personally. You got to have some passion. You're going to need some power. But then it requires a partnership. Text says, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship. Somebody shout fellowship. And the fellowship of his sufferings, being made conformable unto his death. I've discovered that many of us love the glory of God, but not too many of us like the gloom of God. But if you're going to be a true worshiper, you must participate and commune with Jesus in a way that proves you're worthy of fellowship with him. Because I've discovered that every time you worship God, it requires a sacrifice. In other words, every time you get into the presence of God, it's going to require something to die. See, if you're going to really worship God, lust got to die. If you're going to really worship God, envy got to die. If you're going to really worship God, hatred got to die, and pride and arrogance and strife and premarital sex and pornography and homosexuality and lesbianism and lying and backbiting and stealing and even disobedience. If you're going to really worship God, you got to partner up with him. You got to take some stuff out of you so that God can add some stuff to you. God can never put anything new in your hand when it's occupied with the old. It requires a partnership.